Dependency injection is a software development technique that is much broader than the MVC framework. It just so happens that the MVC4 framework has some hooks that make it relatively easy to set up dependency injection. But before you understand how to use MVC4 to hook up dependency injection, you want to understand what dependency injection actually is. What problems is it trying to solve? Dependency injection exists because code needs to be decoupled. A lot of times we think we're writing decoupled code, but we're really not. If you think about your code, a lot of your code depends on concrete implementations of things. Your methods have, I need a new this, and I need a new that, and I need a new the other thing. It has all these objects that it depends on, and it's tightly coupled to those. And as long as it is, we're not really writing decoupled code. Any changes to those objects could result in changes potentially all through of our system. So it comes from the fact that code needs to be decoupled. Decoupled code is reusable. Decoupled code is testable. And it can't be tied to specific implementations. So all these things kind of go together. Decoupled code is reusable and it's testable because it isn't tied to a specific implementation. Instead, the implementation is given to it. Now, if that sounds a little abstract, just hold on. We'll talk through this. This is an important key concept to keep in mind, and it's a huge paradigm shift for a lot of people when they come to dependency injection for the first time, is this idea that instead of code forming its own objects within it, it's going to get all the objects in from the outside. So the code is going to be tied to abstractions like interfaces or abstract classes instead of actual objects that it creates. This is an implementation of the inversion of control pattern, or the inversion of control principle. And it's just the idea that instead of a class controlling every single thing that class needs to do its job, it's going to turn that control over to the outside. Somebody else is going to make those objects and give it to that class. So what is it? Well, we know that methods need objects to do their jobs. Hopefully you're not writing these controllers in MVC that are just these hundreds long lines of code of controllers that just do everything all by themselves. They need other objects to do their jobs. They need data access objects, or they need services, or they need domain objects. The idea behind dependency injection is that these things will come in from the outside. So instead of a controller instantiating its own data access objects, something else on the outside will instantiate a data access object and give it to the controller. And this is often accomplished with the use of dependency injection frameworks. This is a solved problem, as we say in software development. We already know how to do this, and so people have come up with a number of frameworks to automate this process, and most of them work very, very well. In order to demonstrate dependency injection and the problems we're trying to solve, I'm going to use the common example of logging. Logging is very important for most larger applications. We want to log especially when errors are happening, but we also might want to log requests and response and all kinds of things that give us some insight into the way our application is being used and that will help us troubleshoot later on. So let's say that I want to add logging to my MVC controllers. So let's also say that I'm crazy, and instead of using one of the very popular logging frameworks that are already out there, I decide I'm going to write my own. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a class called logger. And I'm going to give it a method called log. It's going to take a message. Let's see. So right now we'll just write the message out to the console. This isn't meant to be a real logger. You've probably picked up on that by now. But this would normally invoke our logging framework or our logging mechanism and do all our logging. You get the idea, right? This is our logger. So normally, if I wanted to incorporate this into a controller, let's say I'm in the home controller, and let's say I wanted to log every time somebody came to the home page. Now, the normal way that one might do this is to say var logger equals new logger. Logger.log someone came to the home page. Okay, probably not the world's best use for a logger, but I feel a little silly putting a try-catch block around serving up a view, so this is the way we're going to do it for right now. So we've got a logger, and it's logging that someone came to the home page. We create a new one here. But notice as soon as I do this, the home controller has a hard dependency now on this logger. Okay? If I change the logger class, or I change its implementation, or let's say I've got a SQL Server logger and then I want to use an event log logger instead, and those are two separate classes, now I have to come in here and change this. Well, that might not sound like a big deal to you, and it probably isn't right now. We only have it in one place. But imagine if we use this class for all of our logging throughout the web application. I could be a busy guy going through here and changing all the methods or all the specific implementations from logger to SQL Server logger or something like that. So let's take a dependency injection viewpoint and do this a little differently. Instead of creating the logger inside the controller, I want to create it outside the controller. Well, one transition point that we might use is the constructor. Okay, we know that the logic that's in the constructor is going to run as soon as this object comes into play. So as soon as we have a home controller, this is going to run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a private variable . Okay, and I can get rid of this. Okay, and I can actually make this read-only if I want to, since the constructor is the only thing that messes with it. Okay, this is better because now I've confined my concrete tie to this place in the constructor. So I could have loggers all through this controller, and if I needed to change it, I only need to change it here. I still have to change it in every controller, but now I've limited my change. But the real issue is, if we wanted this to be as decoupled as we could possibly get it, and make our logger as reusable and testable as we could possibly get it, I don't want the controller to depend on a concrete implementation of logger at all. So what if I did this? I'm going to create an interface. I'm going to call it iLogger. And I'm going to create the log method. And I'm going to have my logger implement the iLogger interface. Well, big deal, right? Well, we're getting there because now logger implements this abstraction, this interface. So I can come over here to home controller, and here's where the magic of dependency injection happens. Now I make this an iLogger, and I pass it into the constructor, like so. Okay, now I have completely decoupled this class from a concrete implementation of logger. Okay? Anything that implements this iLogger interface can be passed in, whether it's a SQL Server logger or an event log logger, it doesn't really matter. All this controller cares about is that the object that it gets implements the iLogger interface. Then it can set this private variable equal to whatever it gets. It doesn't care, it doesn't know, it only knows it implements this interface. And now I can use this code all through my application. Dependency injection is the point of the operation that instantiates a logger and passes it in. And we're going to centralize that code. So if we change our implementation of logger, we only need to change one place. So that's another story of how to get dependency injection wired up to MVC, but hopefully you can see the problem it solves. Now we're set up to receive our dependency from the outside, and if we were to write unit tests around this controller, we could make a fake logger and pass it in, a fake data access and pass it in, a fake service and pass it in. So we are all set up to have some very decoupled code, and implementing dependency injection is going to help us with that.